Modern dating has created a generation of emotionally exhausted people, pretending they are emotionally unavailable by choice. People don't fall in love anymore. They negotiate attention. A delayed reply becomes power. A seen message becomes anxiety. Silence becomes manipulation. And somewhere along the way, people stopped asking, "Do I actually feel safe with this person?" and started asking, "How do I keep this person interested in me?" That's the tragedy of modern relationships. Not heartbreak. Not rejection. Not loneliness. But the quiet destruction of self-worth, hidden behind dating apps, unread notifications, and the constant need to feel chosen. Because the truth is, most people are no longer dating to connect. They're dating to escape themselves. And 2000 years ago, Stoic philosophers already warned us about this kind of psychological slavery. In this video, we're going to explore why modern dating feels emotionally exhausting, why emotionally calm people always seem to have the power, and why the moment you stop chasing validation, your entire life changes. And near the end of this video, we'll talk about one uncomfortable truth most people never realize until it's too late. Sometimes the relationship that destroys you was never sent to give you love. It was sent to expose how little peace you had without it. Part 1: Modern dating runs on validation. There's something strange happening in modern relationships. People are talking more than ever, yet feeling less understood than ever before. We have unlimited access to each other. Unlimited messaging. Unlimited profiles. Unlimited options. And somehow, people feel more disposable than ever. A man spends hours staring at his phone wondering why she suddenly became distant. A woman replays conversations in her head trying to understand why someone who seemed deeply interested disappeared overnight. Nobody says it out loud, but almost everyone is exhausted. Because modern dating quietly trains people to attach their value to attention. To replies. To compliments. To emotional availability. To whether someone chooses them. And the moment another person pulls away, panic begins. Not because love was lost, but because validation disappeared. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." But modern dating conditions people to do the opposite. It teaches them to surrender emotional control to strangers. One good morning text can elevate your mood for the entire day. One cold reply can destroy your peace for an entire week. And eventually, people become emotionally dependent on uncertainty. That's why so many relationships today feel addictive instead of peaceful. Because uncertainty creates obsession. The Stoics understood something most people still don't understand today. The more your emotional state depends on external behavior, the less free you become. And modern society profits from this emotional instability. Dating apps profit from loneliness. Social media profits from insecurity. Attention economies profit from emotional confusion. Because insecure people are easier to manipulate. An emotionally grounded person is difficult to control. Think about it. The person who desperately needs reassurance will tolerate disrespect longer. The person terrified of being alone will ignore red flags. The person addicted to validation will slowly abandon their standards, just to avoid rejection. And maybe you've experienced this yourself. Maybe you've stared at your phone at 2 a.m. trying to decode someone's silence. Maybe you've pretended not to care while internally falling apart. Maybe you've stayed emotionally attached to someone who gave you just enough attention to keep you emotionally trapped. Not because you were weak, but because modern dating has normalized emotional confusion. And this is where Stoicism becomes dangerous. Because Stoicism teaches you to emotionally detach from what you cannot control. Not to become cold. Not to become heartless. But to stop handing strangers the authority to define your worth. Part 2: Ghosting isn't the real problem. People think ghosting hurts because someone disappeared. That's not the real reason. Ghosting hurts because it forces you to confront uncertainty. And human beings hate uncertainty. We would rather hear painful truth than silence. At least truth gives closure. Silence leaves the mind wandering through endless possibilities. What did I do wrong? Was I not attractive enough? Did I say something stupid? Were they talking to someone else the entire time? And suddenly, a stranger you barely knew begins occupying your mental space like rent-free psychological warfare. This is why ghosting feels so emotionally violent. Not because the connection was necessarily deep, but because the brain interprets unresolved silence as danger. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus warned that suffering often comes not from events themselves, but from the meaning we attach to them. And modern dating is full of imagined meaning. A delayed reply becomes rejection. Distance becomes betrayal. Silence becomes proof of unworthiness. But sometimes, people disappear simply because they are emotionally immature. Sometimes they disappear because they're confused. Sometimes they disappear because modern dating gives people infinite exits and very little accountability. And sometimes, people disappear because they never intended to stay in the first place. That realization hurts. But it also frees you. Because mature people eventually understand something uncomfortable. Closure is often a fantasy. You will not always receive explanations. You will not always receive honesty. You will not always receive emotional maturity from others. And if your peace depends on getting those things, you will remain emotionally trapped forever. The Stoic response is not bitterness. It's acceptance. Calm acceptance. You stop chasing explanations from people who already showed you their character through actions. You stop begging for consistency from emotionally unavailable people. You stop trying to force clarity from individuals who benefit from confusion. And slowly, your emotional life becomes quieter, stronger, cleaner. Because the moment you stop demanding emotional certainty from unstable people, you regain power over your own mind. Part 3, Boundaries terrify people who benefit from your weakness. One of the hardest lessons in modern dating is realizing that some people only like you when you are easy to control. As long as you over-explain, over-give, over-chase, over-tolerate, they feel comfortable. But the moment you become calm, disciplined, harder to emotionally manipulate, everything changes. Because boundaries expose intentions. A person who genuinely respects you will adjust. A person who benefited from your lack of boundaries will become frustrated. This is why emotionally healthy people often appear cold in modern dating. Not because they lack emotion, but because they refuse to negotiate self-respect for temporary connection. And that's rare today. Most people would rather betray themselves than risk abandonment. They tolerate mixed signals, inconsistent effort, emotional games. Because deep down, they fear loneliness more than disrespect. But Stoicism teaches something radically different. Peace is more valuable than attention. And this becomes incredibly important in modern relationships. Because modern society romanticizes emotional chaos, toxic passion, hot and cold behavior, unpredictability. People mistake emotional instability for chemistry. But real emotional maturity feels different. It feels calm, safe, consistent, not addictive. A mature relationship should not feel like survival. And maybe that sounds strange in a culture addicted to emotional intensity. But think about your own life. How many times have you confused anxiety with attraction? How many times did your nervous system recognize danger, but your loneliness translated it into desire? This is why self-awareness matters. Because without self-awareness, people repeat the same emotional patterns for decades. Different faces, same suffering. The Stoics believed discipline creates freedom. And in dating, boundaries are emotional discipline. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is quietly walk away without needing the other person to understand why. No long explanation. No emotional performance. No final attempt to convince someone to value you correctly. Just silence. And self-respect. Part 4, Detachment is the modern superpower. There's a reason emotionally calm people seem magnetic. It's not manipulation. It's emotional independence. Modern dating rewards emotional detachment because emotionally dependent people become predictable. Easy to control. Easy to destabilize. But emotionally grounded people move differently. They enjoy connection, without worshipping it. They appreciate love, without building their entire identity around it. And most importantly, they understand that loneliness is painful, but abandoning yourself is worse. This changes everything. Because when you no longer fear losing people, you stop tolerating behavior that destroys your peace. You stop overperforming for affection. You stop trying to become good enough for emotionally inconsistent people. You stop shrinking yourself just to maintain temporary connection. And ironically, that's when people begin respecting you more. Not because you became colder, but because desperation disappeared. Modern society constantly tells people, find someone who completes you. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. Become whole before you attach your identity to another human being. Because relationships built on emotional emptiness become emotional prisons. Two wounded people trying to use each other as anesthesia rarely create peace. They create dependency. And dependency eventually creates resentment. This is why so many people stay in relationships they secretly hate. Not because love still exists, but because fear does. Fear of starting over. Fear of loneliness. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of not being chosen again. But the Stoics constantly reminded themselves of one brutal truth. Everything external can disappear. Youth. Beauty. Attention. Status. Relationships. Everything. So if your identity depends entirely on external attachment, life will eventually break you. But if your identity is rooted internally, you become emotionally resilient. And resilient people move through heartbreak differently. They grieve. They hurt. They heal. But they do not collapse. Part 5, the people who win in modern dating aren't the most attractive. They are the most emotionally disciplined. That's the part nobody wants to admit. Because modern culture obsesses over appearance, while ignoring emotional stability. But emotional stability is rare now. Very rare. The ability to stay calm during uncertainty. The ability to walk away from manipulation. The ability to remain emotionally balanced without constant reassurance. That's power. Real power. And once you understand this, modern dating begins to look very different. You stop idolizing emotionally unavailable people. You stop confusing attention with intimacy. You stop believing love should constantly feel confusing. Instead, you begin asking different questions. Can this person communicate honestly? Can this person regulate emotions maturely? Does this relationship bring peace into my life, or emotional chaos? Those questions change everything. Because eventually you realize, a relationship should add to your life, not consume it. And maybe the biggest illusion modern dating created, is convincing people that suffering for love is romantic. It's not. Losing yourself is not romantic. Abandoning your standards is not romantic. Constant anxiety is not romantic. That's emotional survival mode disguised as passion. And many people stay trapped there for years. Until one day, they become exhausted enough to finally choose peace over emotional drama. That moment changes a person forever. Because once someone experiences the calm that comes from self-respect, chaos stops looking attractive. At some point in life, You stopped chasing people who are unsure about you. Not because you stopped believing in love, but because you finally understand that love should not require self-destruction. Modern dating will continue rewarding performance, attention, status, mystery, emotional games. But none of those things create peace. And deep down, most people are not actually searching for excitement anymore. They are searching for emotional safety, for calm, for honesty, for someone who doesn't make them feel psychologically exhausted. And the strange thing is, the more internally grounded you become, the less desperate you feel to be chosen. That's the paradox. The less you need validation, the more emotionally free you become. The less you fear loneliness, the less power emotionally manipulative people have over you. And maybe that's what the Stoics understood all along. Real peace begins the moment your self-worth is no longer held hostage by another person's attention. Because the strongest people in modern dating are not the loudest, not the most attractive, not the most desired. They are the people who can love deeply, without losing themselves in the process. If this video spoke to something you've personally experienced, let me know in the comments. What do you think is destroying modern relationships the most today? And if you're building a quieter, stronger, more disciplined version of yourself, subscribe to the channel. Because in a world addicted to emotional chaos, calm people become dangerous.